Hi! This video involves quite a lot of talking about the subject rather than building it yourself, so just be prepared, put your seatbelt on, and let's get into it. Hello! My name is Grian, and welcome back to another Minecraft video and another episode of Minecraft Build School. Today I want to talk to you about different Minecraft styles. Now, a lot of people say that they struggle, they can only make one particular style of build. Well, we've got a few examples here today of different styles of build, and I'm going to talk about them briefly and try and sort of allow you to break out of your comfort zone and sort of tell you the theory behind each of these styles so that you can explore them a bit more without going into too much of a tutorial on each. So what we're going to start with is the modern house. Now, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of modern house tutorials, but people say, I can't build modern. Well, it's not strictly speaking true, and I even did a video about how to make modern houses sort of from scratch using your own imagination. You don't have to follow a block-for-block tutorial on this one. So, let's take a look outside. What we've got here is a pretty typical thing. It's quite simple. Even though it looks complicated, it is quite simple. There are three main parts to a modern build, and they tend to be this one big white bit here. This makes up sort of the structure. We have the supporting mechanism, which tends to be out of wood, and then we have the splash of colour, which is the sort of grey that you see there, and a bit of orange in there as well. So those three things typically make up a house, and often on a modern house it includes a lot of windows. So as you can see, there's a lot of glass involved, big open areas, and that's kind of a big feature of a modern house. So let's go over that a little bit more in detail. So obviously, what we've got here is a bunch of white concrete in a big, almost an S formation, and the whole point of this is to be a bit thicker, and this makes up the bulk of the house. This is like the foundation level. Without this here, the house would not work. Whereas if you took out all this middle bit, it would still kind of stand on its own as a shape, as a structure, whereas all this stuff would clearly just fall apart. So when you're sort of considering a modern house, build that bit first, and then everything else fits in nicely. The other thing to point out is that there's a lot of right angles in this. It's very square, very brutalist. This is the sort of style that we see even in real life on these kind of houses. So once you've got something like that, you don't have to make an S shape. You can, do any kind of shape as long as there's plenty of right angles in there. You don't tend to see a lot of curvature in it. That is more resigned for very futuristic builds. But once you've got that shape, it's then time to fill it in, and it's typically done with a color, usually wood of some kind. Now, if anything, this is used to support what's already there. So in this example, it got a big right angle, but it's not supported underneath on the left-hand side. So you can see that the wood there kind of does that. And in fact, this does here as well, the stone brick. And one of the key things on a modern house is having these overlapping layers. So if you've got three different bits of structure, so as you can see, the wood sort of permeates through this all the way to the top. Instead of just having it so it's kind of, stops here, they overlap quite a great deal, and each one overlaps. So you wouldn't have, for example, you wouldn't have them sort of hit each other side by side, always have a bit of an overlap. So it doesn't matter what direction you see it from, there is a gap between each line, and that really helps sort of cement each one as its own individual structure. And it's the same here with the stone brick. There's just sort of a third color set in here as well, and even out the back here with the details, this is all just for the looks of it, but they all overlap in some way, so it gives the impression that each individual block is its own structure, but they fit together perfectly, almost like a little bit of a puzzle. Once you've got all your structure in place with these kind of builds, you typically then just try and detail it. Lots of big open windows, they make up the majority of them. It is really important in modern builds to have a lot of windows because it just mimics what we have in real life. Then once you've got your windows in, you've got your basic shapes, then you can go nuts with sort of these modern, details and stuff, even add a car in. Your details should really match what you're building. So for example, there's a modern car here. Now if there was a horse and carriage there instead of a car, you might think, oh, that's a bit weird. So you really want everything to synergize together, and it really helps cement it down. Let's take a quick look inside, because I know a lot of people are interested in the interior. Now, in a modern house, there tends to be a very open plan. As you can see, the kitchen and the living room are only separated by one bit of decor, and even that is just a bit of freestanding wall pretty much. And then from there you get the extractor fan, you get very sort of the same sort of color palette with the modern styles. This is meant to be like a bit of modern art because it's very abstract. It's just shulker boxes stacked on top of each other. And if we head on upstairs, there's obviously this is a different kind of staircase, but if we head on upstairs, the rooms tend to be quite big, again open, lots of windows. The modern house style in Minecraft kind of relies on mimicking what you did on the outside to the inside. So you can see the stone bricks are here, the spruce is here, and then you decorate it very elegantly. If you want to have a look at modern furniture, I suggest just googling modern furniture. So that style is incredibly different to what we're normally used to in building in Minecraft. But let's head over to a slightly more common one, which is the suburban house. So this is much more of a common kind of house than the expensive modern house you would see there. You would typically expect someone very well off to be living in something like that. Anyway, so the key here is plenty of shape. Now, we've obviously got some A-frames. Now, this is normal. This is sort of the triangular shape, and there's nothing wrong with just using basic staircase A-frames all the way to the top where they meet in the middle. And the other thing, and I've gone over this, and I will go over this in future videos over and over again, is that you've got different colored for each bit. So if I made this fully green, just all of it the same green color, it wouldn't look as nice. Each part of the build looks separated because there's a different color. Almost like the same with the modern house, where you've got the spruce bit and the stone brick bit and the white bit. Well, this is similar, but we're distinguishing each part of the build just by using a different bit of color. And you don't have to do that. You could have the whole house as green, but I do recommend trying to mix up the palette a little bit on these sort of builds. Now let's just talk about the shape for a moment. So we talked about how there's an A-frame, which is totally normal, but notice how there's different sizes. There's lots of different shape. A house doesn't have to be a single block with one A-frame on it. This one is made up of two major A-frames and then one that goes straight through the middle this direction, and that makes up the bulk of the house. So basically you're working with lots of rectangles and lots of A-frames. So also notice how this A-frame is slightly lower than this one, and they differ in size, the work. So there's a lot of different things going on here to do with the shape, but they are quite basic. Like this rectangle here is only a block bigger than the sort of the main one, let's call it. And this one here is just a smaller one that works all the way through. And it doesn't have to go through the inside. Like if we go through, you can see that this stops here. It's just about the color change and the shape that sort of sets each part of this house apart. The other things to mention are the setting. Again, there is a modern garage. Other features include like the patio area. This is quite a common thing, particularly in sort of American builds. Let's take a quick look on the inside. Now, we've kind of got a modern suburban house, so there won't be too much difference in what is in this one to the one we just looked at. But you might find that the rooms are a little bit smaller on the inside, not quite as open plan as the other one. Going upstairs, you might find slightly smaller bedrooms, but overall, you'd kind of expect your detailing to be the same. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on in this style house, but mainly for the exterior purposes, there's a lot going on with the shape of it and how you differentiate the different palettes. So also notice that the roof is the same. Changing the roof color from bit to bit is a little bit risky in my opinion. And another thing to mention is the overhang. Like there is 2 blocks of overhang from the wall. That's a very key part. Do not forget that. That sort of thing you don't have to mention too much. I mean, they all are separate from each other in their parts, but this one, because of the A-frame, because of the very significant roof, The sort of overhang is a very important part of it. And remember, there's 2 floors to a house like this, so you might have some parts that are only on 1 floor, and then some of them have 2. It's a good way to sort of half the house. So that's a quick look at the suburban style. Hopefully I've picked that apart. So next up is everyone's favorite, the rustic house. So there's a big difference between this one and the suburban house. And it's not just the palette. Yes, this one's mainly made out of wood and stone, which is a big part of it, but the main thing is the framing. Now, this does not have any framing. It's just open walls, what you would see in, common practice today. But on this build, there is a oak wood framing all the way around. It goes in every single corner. It halves the house. It has an overhang. So the reason it looks so rustic is because it looks like it's made out of hanging timber, and the sort of the timber frames have been filled in. So this is kind of what you would expect with rustic builds. As long as you include this framework and include like filling it out with smaller windows than you would expect over there. The windows are, 2x2 and maybe a little bit more. That, glass wasn't as frequent. It will look like it, along with the palette, using more of the earthy textures. You got the wood, the oak, the spruce in here for the overhangs. All of that kind of thing will contribute to it. You can still include normal A-frames, but another part of this style is by making the roof look kind of messy, to be honest with you. If you add lots of slabs and sort of make it not as uniform, see, that just goes straight along. Easy to do on the suburban house, but on this one, you've kind of got to balance out it looking messy and then it looking right as well, because if you go too nuts on it, it could look a little bit imbalanced. But you see how it's got a little bit of everything going on here. Some of them are full block, some of them are half, and then it equals a very sort of cobbly, handmade look build, which is kind of what we're going for. A rustic build will look cobbled together more so than the sort of factory packed house that you might expect over there. So that's the big difference. These two are very similar in size, and they've even got the same A-frames and stuff, but there's the framework and the palette change make a big difference on this particular build. Let's take a quick look inside. And again, we're matching the sort of palettes with the earthy frameworking, bookshelves. It's very wooden. So that's the key difference here. Now, if you're going to make a rustic house, I do recommend, I've got a couple of really good tutorials that will show you a different variation on this house. But the key thing here, framework, color set, making it look a bit messy. Right, let's move on. Now, this is a style that not many people tackle, but I can try and go over it. I'm not a particularly strong builder in this style. Now, this is another one that you see in real life, but in sort of Asia. Now, I don't want to pin this down to any particular place, but I did Google Japanese house when we were making this. So the big key here is that you've got a different style roof. Now, roofs are so important, as we already know. I mean, the first build didn't even have a roof at all. It was just flat on the top. It was different. Now, obviously, the iconic shape here is that these corners stick up a little bit, and we have these very gentle A-frames that aren't as rigid as just straight up. They sort of curve in a little bit first before they sort of peak at the top. And mastering this style is definitely a bit of an art. You need to do a lot of research, look at a lot of reference pictures, and try and mimic the sort of shape and style that you would see on those images. And then as for the underneath, it's a totally different way of building. So you've got a sort of pillar set, not quite a framework, but a pillar set here. And you fill in the walls with white on top and wood on the bottom. It could be something else, but you get the idea. You sort of match the colors of reality on this one, since we are mimicking builds that exist in real life. One of the key things are the sliding doors that are typical of this kind of household, and we've mimicked that using wooden trap doors. You could use any of them, to be honest. These ones are great because they've got holes in them and you can kind of see it. Gives it a more airy feel. And then on the inside, we've got kind of a similar thing here, just trying to mimic some of the decorations that you would expect in this household, and kind of try to mimic tatami, even with this oak wood floor, and it's got a different pattern as you go around with the rotations. It's a good little tip there. Rotate the blocks to try and get a pattern using the same particular block there. So yeah, mastering sort of the Japanese style house or the Asian style is quite difficult. Another thing to add is, again, the setting. We added the car in the first one, the garage in the second one. Try adding a Zen garden or something. I know it's very stereotypical, but it does help cement what you are trying to make. So, you know, if you're out learning, people should be able to get it. You know, the rocks are very important in this kind of thing. The other thing here is that in these very traditional houses, now obviously modern houses in Asia look very different, but in traditional ones, you tend to have a platform raised off the ground, and that's quite a key difference. You don't really tend to see that on like the rustic houses or the modern ones. So that is a good key difference there. So hopefully that's kind of piqued your interest in this particular style, and don't be scared to try this one out. It's very difficult. Just give it a shot. So let's move on to a more modern style, but more city-like. So I've done a video on skyscrapers before, but they are a different technique and style to everything else. Now, you could make very, very different skyscrapers to the one I've made, but the point here is that it's got a repeated pattern. One, two, you know, these layers are all the same, and then you've got a bit of variation in the shape, and then you get the idea. It's a repeated pattern all the way to the top. On this particular skyscraper, I've gone for a few things. Obviously, there's the repeated pattern. Now, you can see the andesite working all the way through to the top in a pillar style. But the actual sort of foundation level, the quartz here, does not remain the same. Some of it's one. This bit is sort of the strengthening bit. You got a big structure almost in the same sort of mindset as the first modern house. This one has a key definition. Sort of without this structure here, it would just look like a bunch of steel girders. It wouldn't look like it's got any structure at all. And likewise, if the andesite pillars were taken out, it would look like this is a rib cage in the middle of the air. So you've got to kind of consider how these two bits fit together. Now, you don't have to do this entirely. If you want a more window-orientated one, stick the pillars on the inside and then put all of these windows on the outside. This one's got more of an overhang feel. Now, obviously, some skyscrapers just have sort of the windows up there. Now, I do recommend trying to add some depth to your skyscraper, even if in reality they look like this all the way down to the bottom, very flat. It doesn't translate very well into Minecraft. So I would definitely recommend adding little balconies that people can walk out on, or even if it just means using panes to your advantage, because these offer that little bit extra depth, and it's something to work with rather than just having an entire flat face. So there's a lot to say about skyscrapers in general, but on the whole, they're a repeated pattern all the way to the top. They've got a main structure made out of a key color, and then you've got the support of everything else, and it does work. It does give the impression that this is a skyscraper, but a skyscraper on its own looks very, very odd. I would recommend almost making a city. You need to have lots of them together for the context of this one. So you can't just slap a Zen garden on this one, or the equivalent, and have a skyscraper. Like, the equivalent of a skyscraper setting is just more skyscrapers, and not the same one, I might add. You need to try different ones, and that's, again, mimicking real life, trying to make something look at home, and that's kind of part of building, is not just making the building look nice on its own, but sort of the landscape around it. How can you do that? So with the Japanese house, with the Zen garden and the nature, and you could just put a forest around this and it'd look totally at home. If you put a forest around this skyscraper, it'd look abandoned. You've got to put more skyscrapers for this to look and feel like a city block. So skyscrapers is a whole different kettle of fish, and that's kind of why I'm going over these different styles, to try and sort of pique your interest in different areas. And finally, you might have seen it out the corner of your eye, it is the castle, the sort of medieval style. Now, this is, again, different to everything else, but it's similar to rustic in a way, because we're going back to these earthy feels, more natural materials, lots of stone, lots of wood. The difference here is that the walls are obviously made out of stone, and again, we're matching or mimicking what would have been real-life fortresses. So they come in all different shapes and sizes, but in the sort of fantasy style that we're going for here, you want to make up the majority of your wall out of stone, and then create some sort of living spaces on top made out of wood. Now, this is one particular way to do it. You could make a fort completely out of stone. I have done tutorials on that in the past. Obviously, castles weren't built with complex machinery like today, so if you try and mimic a very hand-built style, you know, by mixing in textures like this, it makes it seem more messy and more realistic because of it. Now, if we go through the gate here, a couple of cool little tricks here is the gate entrance, which is made out of spruce fence, but it's also got buttons on the top. This is obviously well edited in, but it's such a cool little trick, especially with dispensers on the floor with the holes in. It just makes it look completely at home. It's a cool little trick. And then fire on top of the hoppers again. Got our own little building tricks going on here, but they do help set the scene. So again, in here, this is a very typical thing of a castle, to have a courtyard in the middle. This is where people would gather. Horses, again, instead of a car, just stick a mob there. You got, you know, slightly bigger doorways, not just the 2x1. You get bigger arches and, you know, anvils, forges, anything to make this feel more at home. Obviously, there isn't water coming out of castle walls, but that sort of thing, it fits this style immensely. Being able to walk along the walls. So a lot of this comes down to how you plan out your castle, and I'd say the key here is scale. Don't make something too small. I think this is probably one of the smallest castles that you could make that looks fairly formidable. I tried making a tiny castle in a video a long time ago, maybe you guys remember it, but it looked a bit puny. So when it comes to castles, you really need to go big or make a rustic house. So I would recommend sort of scaling up your builds on this and taking, again, another look at Google, look at the shapes that they do and try and mimic them. So let's talk briefly about the style of the roof. Now, you could go for a bit more messy like the rustic style, but these tend to be a bit more small. Now, I wouldn't say go for giant A-frames like on the Suburban House, because I just don't think it would fit. Most of the time, building at medieval level, at the castle level, wasn't very complex. It was big walls that were very strong, but when it came to timber work and stuff, it just wasn't quite as strong. So I would recommend going smaller. If you've got a big castle, I would still make stuff this sort of size and attach it to the side of things to try and, you know, make that work. So I think that's kind of everything that I've covered. Hopefully even just looking at all of these builds will help you get some inspiration, get you thinking about these different styles. And if you struggle with different styles or building different styles in Minecraft, maybe you're a one-trick pony, you're definitely not. You are all very, very talented, and if you can follow a block-for-block tutorial, you can definitely build something from your own mind in a different style. It just takes practice. The first time I made a house, it wasn't very good at all, so I wouldn't worry about trying things and, you know, maybe it doesn't look right the first time, but give it a few attempts. Even making this went through a few iterations before we got to this. And that leads me on to say thank you very much to Jazzy and Pearlescentmoon who helped me put these together, and I really hope that seeing these different kinds of styles sort of gives you more inclination to what you might give a go next. Maybe you're finished with modern houses. They're, you know, in my opinion, modern houses are actually the easiest to make once you've got this technique down, and, you know, I did dedicate an entire video to coming up with your own modern house. If you follow the steps, you'll make something unique every single time. Suburban houses are really effective. It's got a simple building pattern with a really, really nice result. I think that all suburban houses usually look really good, especially at the larger scale like that. Rustic houses are actually one of the harder bits to make, if you ask me. I think those two examples were easier to make than a rustic house. So all of these styles have their merits, their pros and their cons, and it depends what you're into. Maybe you're into making cityscapes with giant skyscrapers, or maybe you're into the medieval fantasy where you want to make some small forts. All of these are achievable, and I hope that this has helped. So the only thing left to say is thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below and what you want to see next. Goodbye!